Sydney's Opera House site, when it was the Fort Macquarie tram depot. Trams ran across the Harbour Bridge until 1958 and continued on Sydney's last lines to La Perouse and Maroubra until 1961.
Since then, there have been regular suggestions that we should return to trams.
The report follows a feasibility study by Melbourne tramway experts on the possibility of running trams in Pitt and Castlereagh Streets in Sydney to the exclusion of all other vehicles. It's been one of Transport Minister Morris's pet projects, but at the time he first talked about it 12 months ago, many people said it was just a pipe dream.
The people who said it was a pipe dream, I think, were perhaps people who had a vested interest or an axe to grind or were anti-trams.
A traffic authority has stated that Sydney's traffic chaos can be relieved only with trams. He suggests that the Opera House be pulled down to make way for a tram depot.
The trams being advocated to take us into the next century are not quite the ones associated with Sydney's past. Horse-drawn trams were hauled down Sydney streets in 1861. Then came steam trams, and by 1900, when the first electric tram ran down George Street, there were 100 miles of track around the city. There was once a time when Sydney had one of the largest tramway systems in the world, and at its peak, there was a tram through the intersection of King and George Streets about every 10 seconds.
Watch along here and then pull the bell. Come on.
Harry Badderham was a conductor on the Sydney tram system for 37 years. The closest reminder left for him now is at the Loftus Tram Museum on the outskirts of Sydney. Trams rumbled through the streets using destination symbols as well as signs. To Canterbury, for example, was 3 green diamonds. But the most famous symbol of them all was the red disc on white for Bondi.
Sydney's Tramway Museum is planning a big open day to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the tram's demise.
The final tram, packed with well-wishers, left Hunter Street right on 3 o'clock. At the controls, Wally Heil, who's now returning to Sydney for the anniversary, and conductor Frank Ratcliffe, squashed amongst the passengers, who's yet to be located. Next month's open day is designed to make up for the apparent lack of recognition shown by authorities at that time for the tram's near century of service.
They were the only city in the world that refused to have any sort of celebration for the closure of their system.
All 30 of the museum's trams will be on display, maintained by volunteers who remember when working on the trams was a prestigious job, admired by the whole community.
In fact, on one occasion, I recall at Ultimo Depot, a driver turned up for work one day and he never had a tie on and his shoes were untidy, so they sent him home.
Ironically, when transport planners scrapped Sydney's trams 25 years ago as an obsolete form of transport, they had no idea that in 1986 we'd be seriously considering another type of tramway, the monorail. Work on the new system is due to start soon, but in the hearts of tram enthusiasts will never replace the old tramways.
Tramway Museum put on a special parade. Tomorrow, there'll be a reenactment of the last ride through the city.
They came in their hundreds today to relive nostalgia. Former trammies and their families were joined by enthusiasts and those wistful to hear the clang of the bell once more. The drivers, the conductors and the inspectors who provided the legends of the tramway system are now in other occupations. But their old love has been poured into keeping these trams in peak condition. Michelle and Stephen Deans came today to ride the beauties their great-grandparents used to drive. It was a summer afternoon in February 1961 when a convoy of 3 corridor trams left the Hunter Street terminus for La Perouse. The trams were farewelled in style. Today, traffic manager of the museum, Peter Kahn, joined his colleagues in remembering that journey.
A lot of sadness, a lot of gaiety, friendship and so forth. It was sad for a lot of the men to see the trams go.
At 2:48, the magic time of that journey, a parade of the museum's trams rolled out in memory. The museum is to be shortly relocated from its present site near the gateway to the Royal National Park to near Loftus Railway Station. They hope for a full kilometre of track, subject, of course, to the generosity of enthusiasts.
So today, just for old time's sake, a group of tram lovers decided to take a trip down memory lane. Some youngsters who wouldn't even remember trams were among enthusiasts on hand to see the old 1995 return to its original route from Hunter Street in the city to La Perouse. But without tram tracks buried many years ago, the old lady needed the help of a semi-trailer for today's run. But despite that, both young and old were keen to climb on board.
The state government is set to endorse plans for a privately run tram line linking Circular Quay with Walsh Bay. The trams themselves will be replicas in keeping with the historic Rocks area. Martin DeBell reports.
It's more than a quarter of a century ago that the last tram rolled out of Sydney. Now they're about to make a comeback. They'll be newly built replicas of Sydney's old trams to provide a transport link through Sydney's historic tourist centre. The proposed route runs from the eastern side of Circular Quay, through the centre of the Rocks and along the Walsh Bay piers.
It would involve the provision of a tramway to carry up to 1.5 million people per year through the Rocks and through Walsh Bay. It would be a major tourist attraction, and it will now be the subject of a detailed investigation.
But it's almost certain to get the go-ahead because it's been included as part of the tender for the development of Walsh Bay as a tourist centre with hotels and restaurants. The Minister was quick to reject suggestions that with monorails and trams joining buses and trains, Sydney will have a piecemeal transport system.
I think what we're working towards is an integrated development to provide the best public transport and the best tourist transport to meet the different needs of Sydney.
A final decision will be made at the end of the year.
Millions of people in Sydney that have travelled on these ferries day in, day out, and I think that this will be the last time this ferry's ever seen in Sydney, and I think that it's nice to see that it's going somewhere rather than just being made another fishing route.
And North Head said her farewells this morning. She'll take 3 days to reach Hobart, a voyage some say she can't do.
Everybody thinks that I must be an absolute lunatic and that everybody with me must be a lunatic. But we've all rallied to the challenge and we've gone into it fairly carefully, and we just hope that we're not lunatics and we get there safely.
If she makes it safely, North Head will be a big tourist attraction for Hobart. A classic manly ferry Sydney may soon regret losing. Steve Barnes, 7 National News.
Everyone loves to be taken for a ride. At least that's what the Sydney Tramway Museum believes. By 1988, the museum hopes to be running a fleet of vintage trams, and today one of the star attractions arrived. A gift from Sydney's sister city, San Francisco.
Clanging, grinding, uncomfortable old beasts they are, but yet everyone seems to have a soft spot for them. After hauling people more than 1 million kilometres in San Francisco, this one arrived to start a new life in Sydney. The 1948 double-ender is on permanent loan from our sister city. It's now destined to become a star attraction among 35 restored trams that will ultimately run between Loftus and Sutherland stations. A sort of living museum.
People that have an interest in trams come from all walks of life, and it's one of those things, I guess, that, like a lot of hobbies, that just grows on you.
Alan Solly, Eyewitness News.
Tram travel to city streets. Under the proposal, a harbourside service would be created between Darling Harbour and the Opera House. Nostalgia buffs were out in force today to welcome back an old campaigner after 30 years in the wilderness.
It was hardly an auspicious return to Sydney for tram number 1943. Rusted and weathered, it was hauled in on the back of a semi-trailer after spending 3 decades in a sheep paddock. But despite the years of decline, memories came flooding back.
We had the biggest tramway system in the Southern Hemisphere, one of the leading systems in the world.
There was something about it, and when the trams went, Sydney lost something.
If Sydney City Council has its way, we'll soon get that something back. 1943 is part of a plan to run a tram service from the city side of Piermont Bridge, along Hickson Road, around Walsh Bay and the Rocks to Circular Quay.
There wasn't room for the cars and the trams. Unfortunately, of course, we went much too far and we took the trams away from places where we should have kept them.
Along with 2 other trams recovered by the council, 1943 would be nostalgically restored, befitting a bygone era. Backers of the plan are seeking some state government funding as well as private investment to raise the $30 million needed. For enthusiasts, it'll be worth it to see trams take their place back in the city.
Now take that expression, shot through like a Bondi tram. That is known all over the world.
A feasibility study into the project will be ready in 2 weeks, but even if approval is granted, it'll be 2 or 3 years before trams once again grace Sydney's streets. Lincoln Howes, 10 Eyewitness News.
He's keen to reinstate trams as a form of city transport, and today took delivery of what might be Sydney's newest, oldest public conveyance. This tram, model R1, numbered 1943, was built in 1935 at the Clyde Engineering Works. Once the pride of the Watson's Bay run, it spent the last 30 years gathering dust and birds' nests on a farm in northern New South Wales. But it's in surprisingly good condition. Even the old advertising posters are still legible. Among those reliving memories today, Watson's Bay restaurateur Peter Doyle.
You might find a bit of chewing gum I left under one of these seats.
Tramway enthusiasts will help restore old 1943. Alderman Bingham eventually hopes to have 4 trams operating on a track from Darling Harbour and around Circular Quay to the Opera House. Backed by private enterprise, they'll serve both as public transport and, hopefully, as a tourist attraction to rival the cable cars of San Francisco.
The latest idea to help solve inner-city traffic problems and attract tourists. If the trial proves successful, we could soon see real trams rattling along our streets.
It's called Tramway, a typical city bus with a clever $60,000 paint job. From July, 3 tramway buses will take over the existing Rocks to Darling Harbour tourist run. It's a novelty designed to increase declining patronage. It's also step 1 in a 3-tiered plan to bring back the real thing.
We're expecting about a 3-fold increase in the number of current passengers using the service.
Sydney residents have shown strong support for a light rail system or modern trams. The old Bondi Rattler's an institution. In 1995, step 2 is planned to come into operation, a tram carriage on wheels. How quickly trams are reintroduced into Sydney will ultimately depend on costs. With current estimates ranging between $30 and $100 million, the government admits it could be a long way off. The Light Rail Association says the wheels of progress should be moving faster.
People remembered how well they were serviced by trams, and clearly the future is that this is the way that Sydney will have to go.
And Sydney has come another step closer to getting an airport city rail link. The government signing an agreement with 2 private companies for the $600 million project.
The route will be about 12 kilometres long, and we expect the passengers will be able to go between here and the city in about 10 minutes.
The rail link should be completed by December 1998. Sharon Godella, National 9 News.
The state government is considering using old tram tracks to provide a high-speed light rail network.
In their heyday, they crisscross city streets, transporting 400 million passengers a year. A lot has changed since the 1940s, but the legacy the trams left behind may be reborn. Their carriageways still carve above and below Sydney streets, this old Wynyard tunnel now a car park. The state government is confident the tram tracks will form a foundation for the future.
Light rail is here, it is here to stay, has a future.
Already in operation throughout Europe and the USA, light rail is seen as the best way to tame Sydney's traffic snarl.
Light rail would be a partial solution to traffic, parking, urban sprawl and air pollution problems.
I think that it's absolutely critical that we have a shift towards public transport.
But replacing the old with the new will come at a hefty price, estimated at close to $3 million for every kilometre of track. Too expensive for the state government.
We need to look to federal government funding out of, for example, out of the Better Cities program, and also out of from the private sector.
There is already a private sector proposal linking the northern beaches with the west before the state government. The Light Rail Association paints a far bigger picture for Sydney's 21st century transport needs. All agree the way of the future will begin with a journey into the past. Mark Ferguson.
Tram travel will probably have twigged a major flaw in this plan already. Often it's impossible to hear your own thoughts, let alone anyone else's. That is, of course, unless the discourse is on top of you.
Would you mind repeating that? I missed that. Spring is here.
Even then it can be a bit of a strain. So it's fortunate that moving words are actually for your eyes, not your ears.
The idea came initially from London, where the Underground had, for the last 6 years, I believe, had a program of poetry on public transport. Richard Foxworthy, our partner, took up the idea, expanded it, improved it, and here we are.
The Ideas Council plans to plaster 150 trams with prose, using posters like these.
No, but they add up there. A big poem would be better than that, wouldn't it?
Banana
Yeah,
that's true. See everything from Henry Lawson and Banjo Patterson, excerpts from Peter Carey and well-known novelists, as well as lesser-known poets, some radical sort of poets.
Lovely.
Is it?
Should be more of it.
Why is that, mate?
Because it gives a bit of, you know, atmosphere and it makes it brightens up your day.
Pickled in the line. Do you know much poetry?
Not really.
No. You got a favourite poet?
No.
You don't really like poetry at all, do you?
Not especially, no.
No, neither does the state government.
What's that saying about poetry, mate? There's not much poetry in money and not much money in poetry, if Jeff Kennett thought. So we decided to go out into the business world and see what they thought, and the businesses were happy.
Happy enough to pay for them. And the trams were happy to have them, and the people were happy to read them, and the sun and the moon smiled down upon them, and the ocean kissed the golden shore where lovers strolled in heartfelt awe, and tearful eyes and leaves of flutter moved in silence.
Here we are in Whiteman Park near Perth on a 1921 Fremantle tram which last ran in 1952.
What's a nice Fremantle tram doing in an unlikely place like this? Well, Whiteman Park is so big that you'd never see it all on foot. So why not travel in comfort? Well, that's what everyone else was doing. What's this called?
Point lever?
A point lever. They put me to work.
Oh! Right, on we go.
Now, watching a cattle muster from a tram may seem a bit incongruous, but not at Whiteman Park, because this place is full of unlikely sights. The whole idea is to bring together as many different outdoor attractions as possible in one place. And it's up to you to pack as many activities as possible into your day. And now, if they can just get the pot roast off the tram track, I think we'll move on.
The city's first trams for 30 years. Tourism Minister Bruce Baird unveiled the new service to run between the Tramway Museum at Loftus and Royal National Park. The trams will pick up passengers every Sunday on the hour. The government says it's also considering a modern light rail system to Pyrmont and Ultimo.
After they were scrapped, Sydney's trams are back on the tracks. A new tramway was opened today in the city's south. If it's a success, we may see more introduced.
Sydney once boasted one of the world's most extensive tramways. At their peak, there was 1,500 trams in service. But the motorcar forced them off the road. The last rattled through the city in 1961. But enthusiasts at the Sydney Tramway Museum refused to forget their favourite form of transport. Today they reopened the line from their museum on the old Princess Highway at Loftus to the Royal National Park.
The operating costs are lower than buses are and much more environmentally friendly, so I think we're going to see a lot more of them in the future.
The 1.5 kilometre trip takes just 10 minutes and costs $2 each way for adults. At the moment, there's only an hourly service on Sundays and public holidays at Loftus, but it's a sign of the return of light rail, with plans on track for at least 2 other services in Sydney, one in Darling Harbour, another for Bondi Beach. Raymond Dale, National 9 News.
Pack your bags to make your journey just that little bit easier. But first, let me show you this place, New Orleans, or as they say around here, New Orleans. It looks like any other city, but I reckon it's one of the most fascinating places on earth.
The worst crime, you were either executed or you went over here and built New Orleans.
Welcome back to New Orleans. This time we're looking at the links with Australia.
The most obvious are the trams, or streetcars as they're called here. Sold cheaply a few years ago, they're now highly prized as a tourist attraction, especially along the downtown tram track to the French Quarter.
Just like Melbourne, the city of Bendigo in Victoria still has trams. Smart city. A few years ago, they were up for sale, but some smart fellas welded them to the rails, and when the dust finally settled, the trams stayed. In Bendigo, they are now a tourist attraction. Personally speaking, I love trams. I love them so much, I decided to apply for a job driving a Bendigo rattler.
Hello, Ernie. G'day, Dennis. I hear you want to join the Bendigo Tramways.
Yep, I want to be a driver.
You sure you want to be a driver? It's a little bit complicated. The left hand, you put the dupalaki in. The right hand, you got the thingo. You synchronise them together. You make sure the overhead pole's on the wire so the power comes down through your tram.
Gee, it sounds a bit too complicated.
To have a nice, smooth ride of Bendigo.
Where's the clutch?
You don't have a clutch in these.
Well, I still want to get a job on a tram, so it's time to get into the gear. But I want to keep me hat. It's me trademark.
Are you ready, Ernie? Right. This is your job. As soon as you're ready to move the tram, pull that twice. Make sure you do it. You haven't got your tram feet yet.
Yet.
You'll get used to it, mate.
Okay. So, first day in the job. Nothing to it, really. Just sit back and enjoy the ride. They've got 31 trams at Bendigo. This one's a rare American burnie. It's a collector's item nowadays. Overseas buyers pay big money for one of these. My sort of tram. My sort of job.
Oh, beauty, people. Okay, line them up. Jump forward.
People. Mobs of people.
Okay, get your monies out. You thought this was going to be cheap, did you? Well, I got me books and my punch. And I'm after some money. Right. Who's going to pay for this? Come on, somebody, please. Gonna get off this lady here. That's Mum, is it? Right, good, Mum, come on, pay up.
They conduct tourist tram rides every half hour on weekends. Travelling on a tram is a great way to see a bit of Bendigo. It's a really beautiful city with wonderful gold rush era buildings. It's a bit of a living museum. And it's a great experience for kids who have never had the pleasure of riding a tram or met a conductor like Ernie Dingo.
We'll get them to sing along in chorus. Okay, everybody, I want you to sing along in chorus. Ready? Eagles, Eagles.
They're a bit disorderly, this lot. Time for some discipline. Well, it's my tram, after all.
If you're not going to sing the song, get off my tram. Get off.
In fact, I've graduated from being a conductor. I want to drive my own tram. So it's time to take over.
It's mine now.
Gee, I like trams. Might drive this one back to Sydney. Go to Bendigo and try one for yourself. Steal a tram. Take it for a run around the streets. I'm sure they'll let you. Just tell them Ernie sent you.
Back on track 2, the City Council has agreed in principle to a $46 million facelift to George Street, including the return of trams.
It's Sydney's most important street, the spine of the city, says Sydney City Council. George Street's also dying from transport congestion and pedestrian overcrowding. So the new breed in Sydney City Council is making George Street more civilised. Wider footpaths first, eventually trams. Modern ones.
They're a little bit like the monorail cabs, only they run on the ground and they go slower and they're more friendly and so on. You can jump on and off in the way that you can with the trams.
They disappeared from George Street in 1958. The new light rail system will loop from Circular Quay to Central Station along Elizabeth and George Streets. But this time, trams or light rail won't be the only form of public transport. Sydney City Council's keen to maintain existing bus services because they bring people, keeping George Street alive. And the eventual outcome?
By the time the Olympics come, George Street is actually one of those wonderful civilised urban streets that we admire in the rest of the world.
Feasibility studies for the system should be completed by late next year.
A light rail system is being suggested for the city centre to ease traffic congestion and make it safer for pedestrians.
The last trams rattled down George Street more than 30 years ago, carrying people around the city centre. And now a committee within the Sydney City Council has supported a plan to bring them back.
It is an exciting prospect, mainly because it allows you to have a very efficient public transport system.
Transforming George Street from Alfred Street to Railway Square would cost an estimated $46 million. The number of lanes would be reduced from 6 to 4, footpaths widened to 10 metres and a median strip added. But the main aim of this proposal is to make George Street safer for pedestrians. So the draft plan also includes a light rail system which would see trams making a comeback to the city.
A more up-to-date, sleeker version of the tram, I think, would be quite a good thing.
And it's a touch of old Sydney, which I think we can do.
It's a permanent traffic jam at the moment, so I suppose it wouldn't hurt to make some change.
The light rail system would run along George and Elizabeth Streets, connecting Central Station with Circular Quay.
Our hopes are, of course, that it will happen, and if it were to happen, it would be very exciting.
Next Monday, Council will consider the proposal in a bid to give the city's main street a facelift before the 2000 Olympics. Jane Hinchke, National 9 News.
And not just any miniature railway. This one is a virtual masterpiece of miniature engineering. With dozens of trains riding the rails at once through what can only be described as breathtaking alpine scenery. And it's not just trains you'll find in this neck of the woods.
Coming from Melbourne, of course, I'm interested in trams, and I just happened to notice that in the Flaxton area there is a tram exhibition, but you're not going to believe it. They're miniatures as well.
This place is called the Tram Stop, and it's the kind of spot where the kids can have an absolute riot playing tram driver all afternoon. And the big kids too, like this bloke. The Tram Stop is the brainchild of Martin and Chris Bell, and you can't help but wonder how on earth they came up with an idea like this.
Well, the whole world seems to have trains running around parks and gardens, private property. People ride on miniature trains, they're very popular. We thought we'd do the opposite thing. After living in Melbourne for so many years, we decided to build trams.
It does look rather sick, Martin, a grown man riding around in a miniature tram. Doesn't this worry you?
No, not a bit.
And I think I'm becoming rather fond of them as well.
Look at me, I'm on a tram!
So, there you have it. 3 fascinating road attractions on the Sunshine Coast. Drop in, and who knows, you might have as much fun as me.
Trams are an inescapable part of Melbourne, as enduring as the Yarra, and sometimes as difficult to live with and as unpredictable as the weather. Most of us take them for granted. Some, though, feel for the trams a passion as all-embracing as the ribbons of steel and wire that crisscross the city. These people call themselves gunsells, tram nuts. They come from all walks of life. Many work on the trams, but all are driven by a force unfathomable and eccentric to those who don't understand. It's an infatuation with the trams.
When I was about 5 years old, before I started school, I used to stand out in the front of my house in St George's Road and write tram numbers down, all the trams going to the city. And as they came back from the city, I would tick them off, proving that they had done their trip.
When it comes to tram nuts, Norm Cross is, in the nicest way, as nutty as you'll find them.
One day, tram 408 went past. and it never came back. And I was in a great panic. I went inside and stomped and put my foot down, said to my mother and father, 408 has disappeared. Where is tram 408?
It wasn't until young Norm joined the Tramways 10 long years later that he solved the mystery of the missing tram.
Back in those days, South Melbourne Depot did a lot of servicing on Preston Depot trams. And 408 had gone to the city and kept on going to South Melbourne for its day in service.
Not that he was obsessed or anything.
This is tram 774. It's a W5 class. This is the last one of its type left in original condition.
Norm's love was nurtured here at the Preston Depot, where from the 1920s to the late 50s, craftsmen hand-built nearly 800 of the city's famous old rattlers, the W-class trams. Sadly, there are just 53 left in service, but Norm knows the number and history of each and every one.
I think I'm as being old friends because I've been involved with them for 35 years. Even before I joined the Tramways, I was interested in trams.
Like so many tram lovers, Norm's passion consumes his life.
Hi, welcome to the Norm Cross Model Tram and Photographic Collection. In this room here, there's over 60 models of various trams.
Norm's small and cramped house, just a short distance from his work, is a shrine to the beloved tram.
I'd like to come down here and have a look at these two trams.
The affection people feel for the trams can be better understood on St Kilda Road at dawn, as an old rattler trundles regally along a corridor of ferry lights. A sense of nostalgia follows in its wake. The soft clatter of wheels on rail speak of a quieter, more sedate time, when gentlemen wore hats and kids stood for their elders. Even the much-maligned modern trams look good at this time of the day. The city now enjoys one of the largest tram networks in the world, and also the world's largest private collection of tram memorabilia, put together almost single-handedly by Norm Maddox. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, Norm can add 1,000 more.
That's the first electric tram run in Victoria. These were the first group of conductresses that come on. This gentleman down here is Mr. Cameron.
Norm's father worked on the trams for 40 years, and Norm served 47 years, retiring as Federal Secretary of the Union. But he can't keep away. At 71, he still clocks on at the Malvern Depot each day to give voluntary service in the canteen and to show visitors around his museum. Norm remembers when working for the Tramways was more than just a job.
In this industry, if you was ever sick, like, you know, or ever in need, there'd always be a tramway man knocking at their door. When men were struggling in the Depression, where everybody in the various depots would contribute a penny a week out of their wages to entertain, like, the children at Christmas. And
he laments the passing of that time and the disappearance of the sports competitions which dominated depot life.
It's a tragic thing. Like, it used to build the spirit of the people.
There have been over the years as many classes of trams as there are letters in the alphabet, and only an enthusiast could tell the difference between many of them. But there is one tram which, above all others, produces mad palpitations in the hearts of gunsells. It's the W.
It's a wonderful feeling, personally. Say you've got your own tram card, you can have the ability to run it on the network.
3 years ago, Shane Moore fulfilled a lifelong dream. He bought a 65-year-old W2, one of just 2 privately owned Ws in Melbourne, and he's as proud as punch. Why not? For $3,000 it was a bargain, and there are none left. Shane plans to use it for charters, not surprisingly, to carry other tram enthusiasts around the city. An hour out of Melbourne, a group of devoted enthusiasts labour to build their own temple to the tram. It's taken more than 20 years to get this far, but the members of the Victorian Tramways Museum have laid 2 kilometres of track and plan to restore a shed full of vintage trams to full working order. One day, they hope it will be Tram World. and figure on every tourist's itinerary.
It's very simple, really. You've got a stop lever and a go lever.
And here, on a windswept stretch of rail in the middle of nowhere, I was initiated into the world of the gunsaw. How fast can these things go?
About 60 kilometres an hour. But on this track that we have here, you'd be flying.
One more?
One more, yes.
My instructor is Patrick Lamprell. Between 9 to 5, he's a computer programmer. But just about every other moment of his waking life, he's Motorman Lamprell. And given that I'm practicing on the very last X1 class tram left in the world, he's remarkably relaxed. What makes a computer programmer get his own driving licence?
A boyhood ambition, a frustrated engine driver, whatever you like. It gives me a great buzz.
And how often do you come out here to do this?
Nearly every week.
Happily, the X1 survived. Unhappily, the much hoped-for revelation that might explain why people like Patrick and all the others devote so much to their trams seemed no closer. Perhaps it's simply you either have it or you don't. One thing is for sure.
I think once you're bitten by the love of the tram system, it never goes.
The train ride? Yeah! You went out National Park yet? Next trip.
Out the ticket lady's coming. I forgot my ticket. Get some money out of it. Hopefully she'll let me on board.
Yes, please.
These guys have got my ticket.
Yep, this is Sydney, and these are trams. Although you may not have spotted one around town since 1961. If you're old enough, that is. Here at the Sydney Tramway Museum, they're still rattling their way along the tracks.
Everyone wants the window seat. You can stand up. There's no seat belts in here either, is there? Nanny went to work on the tram, did she?
This trip is heading towards the Royal National Park, winding its way past what was the old Prince's Highway, with the tram's faster cousin speeding by on the other side.
Bit different from the Tango, isn't it?
Real different.
Speed's not everything. To get there, we've also got to cross the old highway. I'd say there'd be a few surprised motorists. Amazingly, back in the tram's heyday in the 1940s, over 400 million passengers rode the Sydney trams every year. That's more passengers than State Rail carries today.
What were your experiences on the trams? Did you ever ride in the trams?
A long time ago, to Bondi.
To Bondi, was it? Sydney to the Bondi?
That's right.
And Brighton as well? You used to go to the beach there, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This trip finishes in the Royal National Park. We can head off for a day's walking or just stand around chatting until the old rattler heads on back.
Oh, why did that stop?
Why did it stop?
Yeah.
It's at the end of the track, you see.
For some of the people here today, riding the trams is a way of bringing back some good old memories and teaching the young ones a bit about the past.
You wouldn't know what it'd be like without a car, would you? No, didn't think you would.
The museum also has an undercover display packed with trams from everywhere. There's trams from Brisbane, Melbourne, Ballarat, and some a long way from home. This one's interesting. It's a prison tram used to move prisoners between Long Bay Jail and Darlinghurst in the 1950s. But the best thing about this museum is it's active. And this is one of the best rides on what's known as a toast rack.
Sit in here?
Yeah.
All right, I'll jump in. Move over.
Yeah, plus the camera.
Oh, how are you? Good. Where are you all from? Not that far. You been out on the tram before?
No.
Should be good, eh?
Yeah.
Good to see they all agree with each other.
Think of the kids.
But probably more than anything, it's the people running the museum that make it what it is. These guys don't earn a cent for their time and effort they put into keeping part of our history alive. The reward is seeing the enjoyment it gives to others.
Join the train ride? Yeah! You went out National Park yet?
It's somehow a bit sad to think that the old trams were scrapped to be taken place by things like the monorail. They may have caused their own traffic problems, but there's quite a few people here today that wouldn't mind having them back.
So who liked the trams? Put your hand up. Yes, everybody. Everybody loves the trams.
The Sydney Tramway Museum is at the corner of Pitt Street and the Princes Highway at Loftus. It's open from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Sundays and public holidays and costs $8 for adults and $4 for children and concessions.